Good morning. Today's daf is Daf Yud Tet in Masechet Chulin. We are on Daf Yud Chet Amud Bet. Let's see. We are at Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, which is one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8 lines up in the narrow lines, 11 lines up from the bottom of the page, third to last word on the line. So we are discussing the location of shchita on an animal. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Achsher bechuda de kova. He says that the point of the helmet is an okay place to do shchita. So let me share my screen, and we'll really get started here. So I'm going to use this um, well, I'll start with this picture and we'll probably change pictures, which I think I can do. Okay, so here's picture number one. This is a picture that I showed yesterday. We had been talking about the cricoid cartilage, which is right over here. Hopefully you can see my mouse, but it's also, it's the second one down on the left. The arrow points to it. That is the full ring. That is referred to as the full ring in the Gemara. That's because unlike the bones that are below it that cover the thyroid in a horseshoe manner, this one goes fully all the way around. And the thyroid cartilage then effectively serves as sort of like a helmet to the to this to the cricoid cartilage. And what Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is saying is that slaughtering even up that high is still going to be valid. Let's take a look at a cross-section version, and you'll get a better sense. So again, here we have the neck of a cow, and this is the head of the cow, and this is the front of the neck right over here. The opening in the lower bones is right along the back, and the front, the cricoid cartilage is number 9, you can see. And so what we're talking about with respect to the helmet is number 7, is the thyroid cartilage. And so Kari Ale Rabbi Yochanan, Gisa Gisa. So Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, were chavrusas, and Rish Lakish was his brother-in-law, and et cetera, et cetera. But he says, Gisa Gisa, too much. Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi helps us out here. Third line from the bottom of Rashi. Gisa Gisa, Hagas Hagas. You're being too fat, too wide. Meaning, the idea being is you've covered too much. Klomer yoter midai hechsharta. You said that it's kosher more than what is in fact the case. De'ain kosher afil Rabbi Chanina. Even Rabbi Chanina, who we saw at the top of Yud Chet Amud Bet, where Rabbi Chanina says, Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus testified about the slanted cut, right? The slanted cut, where he says shehik sheira, that is only in connection with the slope, the very initial piece of the thyroid cartilage. The main aspect of the thyroid cartilage, the whole thyroid cartilage, would not be okay. So Amar of Papi Mishmei, right? And so, continuing on in Rashi, Dafilu Rabbi Chanina, the ain kosher afilu Rabbi Chanina elamim makom shechidudo matchil la'alot. It's only the point where the point begins to rise. So I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that it's essentially this area right here, that if anything that is closer to the front of the animal, then that would not be kosher. And so that is what Rabbi Chanina says. And so how could you possibly allow effectively the entire, right, thyroid cartilage? And so Amar of Papi, Mishmei de Rava, Paga Bechite. So now, so another ruling in connection with this if you were to hit the and so now let's take a look. If you were to hit the wheat, and so what does that mean? If you were to hit the wheat, then it would be trefa. It would be not kosher. And so Rashi tells us chite glans domin lechitin, that there is a piece of the cartilage of the thyroid cartilage that is like wheat. Munachin al hakana, and it rests on the trachea, eitzel hakova, next to the helmet. And so that is it's understood to be the corniculate cartilage, which is right over here. And so that which is that piece, which is effectively considered to sort of be standing up like a wheat kernel, or maybe it's small like a wheat kernel. And so that little piece, that if you slaughter there, it's going to be not kosher. Now, what does it mean by paga? Is it literally that if you hit it, it's not kosher? Or is it if you come close to it, it's not kosher? So iboilahu, paga v'naga behen, does it mean that you actually touch it? Vayivga bo vayamot. When when Shlomo HaMelech tells his agents that he wants to kill Adoniyahu for having effectively rebelled and had his mother come and ask him so that he could also have one of David HaMelech's concubines. So then Shlomo has him killed, and so it says Vayifga bo vayamot, that he hit him and he hit him and he died. So that is a situation where paga means to actually make contact. Odilma paga below naga, or maybe paga does not necessarily mean to a touch. Kediksiv vayifgeuvo malachei elokim. So when Yaakov is traveling, he meets the angels of God. It doesn't mean that the angels hit him. It's just he encountered them. They came close to one another. And so the question is, how close do you have to come for it to become a treifa, meaning not kosher? So Itmar, Amarav Papa Mishmei Derava, Shier Bechite. As long as you had, even if you hit it, as long as you left over some of it, so then kshera, then it is kosher. So when it says, according to Rashi, shir bechite, haniach miktzat litzad harosh, as long as a little bit of this corniculate cartilage is left over, is above the area of the slaughtering, well, then you're going to be okay. Umiktas litzad hakana, and then of course some of it will be below, next to the trachea, kagon shechatchu, meaning that it was cut, meaning the carniculate cartilage itself was cut. Dahainu paga v'naga. So this is clearly an indication of paga v'naga being the situation where it's kosher, and so if you don't hit it at all, meaning if you go as close as you can, but you don't cut any of it, well, then it would be not kosher. So Amar Rabba Meimar Bar Mar Yanuka Haba Ka'amina Kamei de Rebbe Chia Brei de Rav Avia v'Amarli. So Rabbi Meimar said that he was standing in front of Rabbi Chia, the son of Rav Avia, and he said, Shi'er b'chite kshera, that if you left over some of the wheat kernels, some of the corniculate, then it's still going to be kosher. Amar le Ravina le Ravashi, and so Ravina said to Ravashi, Amar li Rav Shimon Misuvra. Rav Shimon from Suvra said to me, Ikla Mar Zutra la Asrin Vidarash, that Mar Zutra once came to our place and he gave the following drasha, he gave the following lesson. Shir bechite kshera, as long as you leave over some of the wheat kernels, it's going to be kosher. Mar Barav Ashi Amar, Paga bechita kshera, Shir bechite trefa. As long as you meet the kernels, then if you it's going to be kosher, but if you actually hit the kernels, it's going to be not kosher. So that means that you actually have to be below the corniculate cartilage. That if you actually touch the corniculate cartilage at all, well, then it's going to be not kosher. And so in this case, paga doesn't mean to touch; it means to come close to, and not necessarily to touch. Okay, and now we turn to the very top of Yud Tet Amud Aleph, the Hilchasa, and the halacha is Mishipui Kova Ulamata Kshera. From the slant of the helmet and down, it is going to be kosher. Behind the Deshir Bechite, and that is that you at least leave over some of the wheat kernels. So essentially, you can see here that at this point, right where the corniculate cartilage is where the thyroid cartilage begins to slope up. It changes its angle right there. And so as a result, that's what I'm understanding means the slant of the helmet. And so as a result, as long as you stay below that, meaning you touch at least a little bit of the corniculate cartilage, even though you are above the cricoid cartilage of the trachea, that is still going to be okay, and it will be a kosher shchita. Rav Nachman. In fact, let's take a look at Rashi. Top Rashi on Yud Tet Amud Aleph. V'hilchas hamishipui kova lumata kshera kodem sheyatchil kova, before that helmet begins l'shefa to angle v'la'alot and go up. Again, highlighting this angle right here. That's how I'm understanding this. So then it is going to be kosher. Umishamu lahalan treifa. But if you do anything above that, if you do anything above where it says corniculate cartilage, well, then you will not have encountered the chite, and therefore that will be a problem, and it'll be a treifa, not a kosher shchita. Okay, back into the Gemara, second line on Yud Tet Amud Aleph. Rav Nachman, Aksher Mishipui Kova Ulumata. Rav Nachman also says that it's kosher from the slant of the kova, from the slant of the helmet, and below. Again, that is equated with below the corniculate cartilage. Amarele Rav Chanan bar Rav Katina le Rav Nachman. Rav Chanan bar Katina asks, "Come on, who is this like?" Because if we now remember all the way back to our Mishnah, right? So if we go back to the Mishnah, and I may even be 2 Mishnayos ago, we saw that according to the Rabbanan, you needed to have your entire shchita needed to be within the cricoid cartilage. You couldn't even be within the thyroid cartilage. If any of it went above the cricoid cartilage, you would have a problem. And yet, and then we had, let me find it. And then we had, we'll see it in a moment. We had Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda, who said, okay, as long as you have a majority within the cricoid cartilage, you're fine if you go a little bit above. But you still need to have a majority within the cricoid cartilage. That isn't consistent with Rav Nachman at all, because again, Rav Nachman says you could all be within the thyroid cartilage, and that is above the entire cricoid cartilage, as shown on the diagram on the screen. And so, as a result, Kiman, lo karabanan, lo karabi Yossi b'Rabbi Yehuda. It's not like anybody that we saw in our Mishnah. So Amar lehei, so Rav Nachman explains, Ana lo chilek yadana, v'lo bilek yadana. I don't know chiluk, I don't know bilek. And so what does that mean? It's essentially, Rashi will help us explain. It's interesting. There are 2 different ways to understand it. One is very locally here. So what Rashi, 3rd line down, lo chilek yadana v'lo bilek yadana, lo karabanan. I'm not like the rabbis. Shamati, I didn't hear like the rabbis. Demaire b'mechalek tabat l'shnayim, because they say that the ring, and again, the ring refers to the cricoid cartilage, so that has to be broken into 2, meaning that you have to do the shchita below the top of the cricoid cartilage, so that effectively you end up with 2 separate rings as a result. Below Rabbi Yossi, and that's That's chilek, because you're dividing something into two. V'lo Rabbi Yossi shamati. And I also didn't hear like Rabbi Yossi, Demairi b'mavlek, who talks about destruction. And mavlek is similar to bilek. And so as a result, that's the idea. B'mavlek hasimanim, where you destroy the simanim. And what does it mean destroy? To karnir, bilaz, lashon muvulka. It's a language of destruction. Kach shamati. And why is it called destroy? Because according to Rabbi Yossi, right, you're allowed to begin in the cricoid cartilage and end outside the cricoid cartilage. So you don't even have a complete ring of the shechita. And so as a result, you're essentially destroying the ring of the cricoid cartilage. And yet he didn't hear either of these approaches. Rather, he had heard a different approach, which we'll see in a moment. But Rashi also now offers another interpretation. Aval re'iti b'chelik. However, you may remember these guys, Chilek and Bilek, from when we learned Sanhedrin together, Daf Tzaddik Kedamabet, although I did not. Atidin Yisrael de'achle Shnei Mashiach, that we said that in the age of Mashiach, the Jewish people are going to have sufficient food. They'll be well fed. Uparchinan, and we asked Pshita. Of course, they're going to be well fed in the days of Mashiach. Elaman achil lehu atu chilek v'bilek achlile. Who do you think is going to eat the food in the time of Mashiach? You think it's going to be fellows by the name of Chilek and Bilek? Meaning it's like two Ploni Almonis that we're referencing. Dvarim, and according to these words, Lishna Ba'almahu. It's just a colloquialism that we're saying that Chilek and Bilek are Rav Nachman doesn't know. It says if he's saying I don't know who the rabbis and Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, are, and so it's just a way of conveying that information. Rather, back into the Gemara, 5 lines down, middle of the line. I'm sorry, 6 lines down, third word on the line. Ana shmaita yadana. I know it. I know this teaching. Da Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Va'amri la Amar Rabbi Abba bar Zabda Amar Rabbi Chanina. Va'amri la Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. So any of these people may have said, Mishipui Kova Ulamatik Shera. I have a tradition that from the shechita of the slant and the helmet and below, it's going to be valid. Meaning, as long as I'm below the slant, everything is going to be okay. From Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, and Rabbi Yoshua said, Muguremes de Rabbanan, the cut that would be, again, hagrama is a reference to the prohibition of doing shechita in the wrong location. So something that would be hagrama according to the rabbis, meaning you cut outside the cricoid cartilage, kshera l'Rebbe Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, that would be kosher according to Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, who allows you to go outside the cricoid cartilage as long as most of the cricoid cartilage is cut. Uda Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and a hagrama for Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, where you have to at least cut a majority of the cricoid cartilage, and so now you cut less than a majority of the cricoid cartilage. Kshera l'Rebbi Chanina ben Antigonus. That is going to be kosher according to Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus, as we saw again at the top of Yud Chet Amud Bet, where Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus testified that even what is called hagrama, according to everybody else, is still going to be kosher, as long as, and what does he mean by that? As long as you're still below the carniculate cartilage, as long as you are still below the slant of the helmet. So Pshita, that's obvious. Everybody could figure that out. So Ma'udetema, Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus, Rabbanan Kai. No, maybe Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus, when he said that hagrama is okay, he was referring to the rabbi's hagrama, meaning that maybe he agrees with Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda. So Kamash Malan, that's why Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is telling us that he disagrees even with Rabbi Yossi. Well, one second. Now that you've given me this idea that maybe Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus actually agrees with Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda, maybe that's true. No, not necessarily, because Im Kain, heyed aleha mi baile. If in fact he agreed with Rabbi Yossi, then it should have said that he testified about it, meaning he testified about the statement of Rabbi Yossi. But rather, instead, it doesn't say that. He testified specifically about the fact that Hagrama was okay. The Hilchasa Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus, and the halacha is like Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus, Dekoi Rav Nachman Kvasei, because Rav Nachman agrees with him, and so as a result, we end up saying that the slant of the helmet and below is going to be okay. You can't do the entire slant of the helmet, but it seems like as long as you are below the carniculate cartilage, you are all right. So now we had this machlokas in our Mishnah, again, between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. So Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav Asi, machlokas b'sheshachat shnei shlish. The machlokas is where the cutting is 2/3 of the cricoid cartilage and 1/3 beyond. The Rabbanan Sabre, because the rabbis would say in that situation, Kula Shchita Be'inan Betabas Gedola. You have to all be in the big ring, meaning all be within the cricoid cartilage. And if you have anything going outside the cricoid cartilage, again, cricoid cartilage is right here. So if you have anything, as long as the shchita goes through from one end to the other to create effectively 2 rings, then you're going to be fine. But the Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda suffer ruba kukula. Whereas the Rabbi Yossi says, as long as you have the majority, you're going to be fine. So aval, but higrim shlish v'shachat shnei shlish. But if you began your cut by being outside the area and you complete the cut within the area, well then divrei hakol psula. Everybody would agree that it is invalid. T'kinafka chayusa. Because when the animal died, when the life of that animal leaves it, be'inan ruba b'shchita, you need to have done a majority of the shchita in the right place, the leka, and it won't be the case that you have the majority. Because if you begin up here in the thyroid and then cut down to here, when you have finished cutting, the trachea and the windpipe, the trachea and the esophagus, you will end up having cut a majority of those pipes at a time when your shchita is majority not in the right location. And therefore, according to this understanding, it's going to be problematic. So Amar le Rav Chisda says to Rav Huna, Adarabba, I could make the exact opposite argument. I could tell you, you know what? Lema mar ipcha. You should say the opposite. Machlokas keshehigrim shlish v'shachat shnei shlish. That the machlokas between the rabbis and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda is when you begin outside the area and you then go into the area. Because the Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda savar midi dahava achatzi kanet pagum, that if you imagine the following situation where exactly half of the trachea was already torn, okay? Now, you might have said, and I certainly was thinking this, one second, if half the trachea is already torn, isn't that a treifa? And the answer is no. As long as not a majority of the trachea was torn, it is okay, and you can still shech that animal, and it will be kosher. So here we have a situation where exactly half of the trachea was cut. And if you, in that case, cut a little bit extra, that a little bit extra is going to be sufficient to make the entire shchita valid. So you don't actually need the shchita to be a majority of the cut, as long as the moment of the death, meaning when you hit majority, it is a valid shchita, well then it's kosher. So if that's true, well then what can we consider the initial 1/3 cut that's in the wrong location, according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda? We could pretend that is a cut that basically creates an existing hole in the trachea that already pre-existed, in which case everything is fine. Because now when you get to the halfway mark, because you only are doing 1/3 of the cut above the where you're supposed to be cutting, and now you go into the cricoid cartilage, and 2/3 of your cut are in the cricoid cartilage. Well, when you hit the halfway mark, you are doing a valid shchita, and so as a result, even in that situation, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda could say that it's valid. V'Rabbanan, and the rabbis would say hasa makom shchita. Well, in that case, yes, I agree that when the trachea is half torn and I do even a small additional tear, then it's going to be a kosher shchita. If I do a small additional shchita, if my shchita causes the cutting of the trachea, the additional millimeter to get you to the majority, well then it's going to be a kosher shchita. But here, the first third of the cut is not in the right location. It's not in a place that you can do the shchita. So haka lav makom shchita. Now, where you're doing the first 1/3 cut beyond the limits of where you're allowed to do shchita, that's not a good cutting location, and therefore the whole shchita goes away. Aval shachat shnei shlish v'higrish shlish. However, if you began by doing the shchita in the right location and you do 2/3 in the right location, well then divrei hakol kshera. We could say that the whole thing is good because everybody agrees to the principle of rubo shel echad kamohu. In fact, we have a Mishnah that we'll see in about a week, that is going on Kaf Zayin Amud Aleph, that says that a majority is like the whole thing. And so as a result, when it comes to the cutting of the pipes and cutting of the trachea and the esophagus, and so as a result, we should say the exact opposite. So Amar Rav Yosef. So again, we have these two viewpoints: whether whether the machlokes is where you cut 2/3 proper and 1/3 improper, or is the machlokes where you cut 1/3 improper and then 2/3 proper. So those are two different ways that the machlokes could find itself. So Amar Rav Yosef says, "Ma name alan dahu ruba dahasam." Who is it that says that this is the majority is like the whole thing? Lav Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda Katani law. Wasn't that Mishnah on Kav Zayin Amud Aleph taught by Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda? Dilma, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Katanila. Maybe it's only Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, who taught it, and not the rabbis. And so as a result, that would be the reason that we would have the first view of the machlokas, that the machlokas is where you cut 2/3 within the cricoid cartilage and then 1/3 outside the cricoid cartilage, and not the machlokas in the other direction. And so Amarle Abaye says, Atu kol ruba de alma, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Katani lahu. Are you now going to tell me that everywhere in the world, if you're telling me that the rubo kikulo in the Mishnah on Kav Zayin Amud Aleph is only Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, and not the rabbis, how can you possibly say that? Are you going to tell me that's who says all of the rubo kikulos in the entire Shas? That's not true. So Amar Le, Rabbi Yosef responds, no. Ana ruba de shchita kamina. It's only in the context of shchita that we would say it. De shamana lahu de pligi. Because I've heard that specifically the rabbis and Rabbi Yossi disagree about this. As Rashi tells us, Ana ruba de shchita kamina. It's 1, 2, 3, 6 lines up from the bottom of Rashi in the wide lines. Kol tana de azul b'shchita basar ruba kamina de Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Any Tana that says, any Mishnaic authority that follows the Shchita, that Shchita follows the majority, is holding like Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, Vilav Rabbanan, and not the rabbis. Because I heard specifically that they argued in this area. V'amri de lo azlinan, and the rabbis would say that we don't follow b'shchita basaruba, that when it comes to shchita, you can't just check the robe. We don't just follow the majority of the cut. Rather, your entire cut has to be valid. You can't. It's not enough to shechta the majority in the proper manner and the minority in the improper manner. Any amount that is shechted improperly causes the entire animal to be not kosher. So lishna achrina. Amrila. So there was a different version of the entire conversation that we just had. Amr of Huna, Amr of Asi, machlokas shehigrim shlish v'shachat shnei shlish. That the machlokas is where you had 1/3 where you were in the wrong area, and then 2/3 where you're in the right area. To Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Midi Dahavia Chatzi Kane Pagum, because Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says that you follow that it's just like the case where half of the trachea was already damaged, and therefore you're going, as you do a little bit extra, it's going to be fine. The Rabbanan and the rabbis say no, it's not like that case because Hasa Makom Shchita, that is where the tear that existed already was in the area of where you can do proper Shchita. Hachalav Makom Shchita, but here by definition, because we say that the Higrim Shlish was happening first, it was not in the right area. Aval Shachat Shnei Shlish v'Higrim Shlish. But if you originally cut 2/3 and then you cut 1/3 in the right area and then you cut 1/3 in the wrong area, Divrei Akol Kshera. Everybody agrees that it's kosher. Dahatanan Rubo Shel Echad Kamohu. That the majority of one pipe is like the entire pipe, and so similarly, the majority of the shchita being kosher at the time that the animal is killed, when you reach the halfway mark. Well, then the whole thing is going to be valid. That was, of course, how we said the later view. That was the view that Rav Chisda said to Rav Huna according to the prior understanding of the Gemara. So now, Maskifle Rav Chisda is going to ask a different question to Rav Huna. So man lema lan dahu ruba dahasam lav Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Katanila. Maybe, now Rav Chisda is asking the question that Rav Yosef asked. And he says, well, one second, how do you know that the language of Divrei, that when it says Rubo Shel Echad Kamohu, that's not Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Chanina? La Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina Katani La. Maybe that is just Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Chanina. Dilma Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Katani La. Maybe that was only taught by Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda. So Amrle Rabbi Yosef now says back, Atu ko rubo de alma. So now Rav Yosef asked the question that Abaye asked, and he says, "You're going to tell me that every rove in the entire Shas is Rav Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, and that's it, and that's who taught it? Katani lo? Those are the ones who taught them? No." Amar le, Rav Chisda says back to Rav Yosef, "Ana ruba de shchita kamina." No, only in the context of shchita. Because I've heard that they argue. So here we have Rav Chisda hearing that they argue, whereas in the prior situation it was Rav Yosef who heard it. So now we had two different versions, and now we have a new example. I think I'm going to end sharing because I think we don't need this on the screen at the moment. So Higrim Shlish. So what happens if you cut in the wrong area at beginning, the Shachat Shlish, then you cut a U-shaped cut so that the beginning is too high, the end is too high, but the middle is just right. So Rav Huna, Amar of Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, Kshera, it's kosher. Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Treifa. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, no, it's not kosher, it's a treifa. So Rav Huna Amar Rav Kshera. Rav Huna says in the name of Rav that it's kosher kinafka chayusa because when the life of the animal leaves it, bishchita kanafka, it's doing the right thing. Meaning because the bottom of the U, when you hit the 50% mark, is in the right area, that is considered a valid shchita. And so as a result, based on the idea that we saw that again. In both, whichever approach we have, it was an idea that was held by Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, who said that it's sort of like the situation where the trachea is already cut. So too here, we'll view it as if the trachea is already cut, and now you get to the right point, and you do a valid shchita, and even though the majority of your shchita cut is not correct, we're going to follow the moment of when the animal's life leaves it. And so as a result, that's going to be fine. and therefore it's going to be kosher. So, b'shchita kanaka. When is its life leaving? It's leaving when it's doing proper. When the person who's shechting is doing proper shchita. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav Treifa. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav that it was a treifa. Be'inan ruba b'shchita deleka, because you have 2/3 in the wrong place, 1/3 in the right place, and you need to have the majority of shchita, and you don't have that, so that's going to be a problem. So shachat shlish, on the other hand, if you have now the opposite situation, shachat shlish, you do the right third in the beginning, vihigrim shlish, and then you do the outside, the wrong area afterwards, v'shachat shlish. So now we have an upside down U. So what's the story there? Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Kshera. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav that is kosher. So Asu Shaila Rav Huna. That question now came to Rav Huna. Again, Rav Huna said in the first case it's kosher, and so now what about the second case? So and Amar Lahu, and he said to them treifa. He says that it's a treifa, and it's important to note. Take a look at the last Rashi on the daf on Yud Tet Amud Aleph. Asu Shailua LaRav Huna Amar Lahu treifa misvara denafshe Amar. He said it on his own thinking. V'lav mishmei de Rav. He didn't say it in the name of Rav. Notice that we had Rav Yehuda said both of his statements in the name of Rav, and Rav Huna said his first statement in the name of Rav, but this one he did not say in the name of Rav. Midelo ka'amar lahu, because he didn't hear it. Haki kamar Rav. He didn't say that this is what Rav said. Treifa, that it's a treifa. For Rav Yehuda Amra Mishmei de Rav, but Rav Yehuda said his statement in the name of Rav. So as a result, we have that disagreement. So now this is a disagreement in some ways between Rav and Rav Huna. So Shama Rav Yehuda Ikbad. Rav Yehuda heard that Rav Huna had said that it's a treifa, and he was upset by that. Amar tarifna umaksharna tarif. He's saying that my kosher things that I say are treifas, and he's saying that what I say is a treifa, he's saying is kosher, and what I'm saying is kosher, he's saying is a treifa. So Amar Rav Huna shaper kamikbad. He was right to be annoyed. Chada, because first point, ihu shmiya leminei de Rav. He heard it from Rav. Va'ana lo shmiya lei. I did not have a teaching from Rav on this topic. V'od ha'ika ruba b'shchita. And moreover, there is this concept of rov being shochet. And so as a result, you need to have rov. And so therefore, maybe he's right. So Amar le Rav Chisda tells him, lo de'ederbach. Don't retract what you're saying. Because if you retract what you're saying, de'im kain, as we turn to Yutet Amabet, mafasta kamaisa, you're going to also lose your first ruling. Hasam, my time of kamachashart, because why did you say that the first situation of hagrama, shchita, hagrama is kosher? Dekinafka chayusa, because you followed based on when the life left. Behechshera kanafka, because it left when the life left when it was doing a kosher shchita. Well, hachinami kinafka chayusa bahagrama kanafka, when the life left, it is not kosher, and therefore, if you end up giving up on the second ruling, you're giving up on the first ruling as well. Okay, so Ikla Rav Nachman L'Sura. Rav Nachman visited Surah Bo Minei. So they asked him, Shachat Shlish v'Higrim Shlish v'Shachat Shlish. The case of good, bad, good. What's the story there? Mahu. So Amar Lahu Lav Hainu de Rabbi Elazar Bar Manyumi. Didn't Rabbi Elazar ben Manyumi answer this? Damar Rabbi Elazar ben Manyumi Shchita Hasuya Kemasreik Sheira. That if you do a shchita like a comb, meaning that you do up and back, that's going to be valid. No. How do you know that he means that you do it like a comb into and out of the area of the shchita? Maybe the point is that you're staying within the area of the shchita, but going up and down. And yet it's still going to be kosher. No, b'makom shchita ma'imil meimra. But one second, if it's all the cut is within the area of shchita, what are you telling me? What's the chiddush? Of course it's going to be good. No, not necessarily. Ma'udetema be'inan shchita meforas v'leika. Maybe you need to have a clear cut. As Rashi says, miforas migulav keret. It needs to be clear and obvious. Kamo upara at Rosh Haisha in connection with, I guess it's not this week's parsha, but next week's parsha. Parshas Naso. We're going to see that, right? If you, when it comes to the sota, it's going to be you have to. When it comes to a sota, you need to reveal her hair, and so her hair becomes uncovered. Reveal the head of the woman who's accused, and so as a result, I might have thought you need a good cut, a very clear cut. Kamash Milan, not so. Rav Elazar ben Menyumi is telling us that even if you cut up and down, it's going to be fine. Okay, so let's take a look. Some last questions. We have a series of 4 questions and see what they say. So Yosef Rabbi Abba Achura the Rav Kahana. So Rabbi Abba was sitting behind Rav Kahana. But Yosef Rav Kahana kamei the Rav Yehuda, and Rav Kahana was sitting in front of Rav Yehuda. The Yosef Kamar, and Rav Kahana was saying, Shachat shlish, you first do a good third, the higrim shlish, and then you do a bad third, the shachat shlish, and then you do a good third, mahu. What's the law? So Amarle, shchitaso kshera, right? So it's a good, it's kosher because we follow the majority. That seems to be the final result of our answer. So higrim, okay, next question, higrim shlish, v'shachat shlish, v'higrim shlish. So you cut 1/3 outside the area, then 1/3 in the right area, and then 1/3 outside the area. So again, we do here it's bad, good, bad. So mahu, what's the halacha? So amarle, shchita so psula. It's not valid. Meaning again, we're following the majority. We're not following the moment of death. Shaka b'makom nekev. Now, what happens if you have a hole that was pre-existing? Mahu, what's the halacha? Well, amarle, shchita so kshera. It's of course kosher because when you get through that hole and you cut that little bit extra, you're doing a proper shchita at that moment, and therefore it's going to be kosher. But the key is that we're talking, again, according to, as the rabbis reflect on it, right? The rabbis would say that you need to have, it needs to be in the right area. The whole of the trachea is within the area where shchita is kosher. And so in that case, it's going to be a kosher shchita. Shakad upaga bonekev. What happens if the hole in the trachea is behind is at the back of the neck of the animal? And so as a result, when you're shechting in the beginning, you're cutting the actual trachea. And now when you get to the 50% mark, because it's exactly 50% cut, the one little bit of majority is already cut. And so as a result, when you're connecting the holes, the hole that the slice that you are cutting, and you're connecting it to the hole of the back, you essentially never have a situation where you're cutting the 50.1% of the trachea. Because as soon as you get to 50%, now you've reached the hole in the back. So as a result, do we say, well, when you hit that hole, you're effectively, we'll view it as if you're completing the shchita, or do we say no? The completion of that shchita is going to be not by you. It's as if it was done by no one. So amrale shchita so psula. That shchita is invalid. Whoa! Azal Rabbi Abba Amara Kamei de Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Abbas went and said this in front of Rabbi Elazar. Azal Rabbi Elazar Amara Kamei de Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Elazar went and told Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Le, and Rabbi Yochanan said, Ma'ishna, what's the difference between cutting the complete trachea, the part of the trachea that does not have a hole in it, and then reaching the hole, or beginning with the hole and reaching the rest of the trachea? Why should that be different? So Amrle, Shachab b'makom nekev, Nasa kamisha shachad ovid kochavim v'gamer Yisrael. When you begin with the hole, well, we can pretend that the hole was already there. It was as if a non-Jew cut that hole, and now a Jew is completing the cut. Because as soon as you get to the next little bit and you're completing the cut, that you're going to be fine. shachar upagabo nekev. But if you do a shchita and the hole is at the end, so nasa kamisha shachar yisrael v'gamar ovid kochavim. Well, then it's as if the Jew did the first part of the cut, and then Ovid Kochavim did the last part of the cut, and that's not going to be valid. So Kari Alei, Rabbi Yochanan got up, said, yelled out about this. Ovid Kochavim, where are you bringing Ovid Kochavim? Now, you might have thought, at least Rashi notes, that you could have thought that he was calling Rabbi Lazar and Ovid Kochavim, but that's not the case, obviously. So let's take a look at Rashi, 3, 6, 8 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi. Ovid Kochavim, lo shaya koreh lo Ovid Kochavim. Rashi says, don't think that Rabbi Yochanan was calling Rabbi Lazar an idolater. Ella liglog alav. He was mocking him of why are you mentioning Ovid Kochavim? Ovid Kochavim, kolomer b'shchitas Ovid Kochavim ata tola. Tamecha, your reasoning is based on the shchita of an idolater. The kol hayom ata yochal lomar. You could say all day. You can call out Ovid Kochavim, saying that it's an idolater that's doing it. Ve'ena tamid domim kimim farish Rabba. But you're going to see, as Rabba is about to explain, that these are not comparable situations. So Amar Rabba, shapir karei alei. Ovid Kochavim. Rabbi Yochanan was right to call out Ovid Kochavim because Bishlama Hasam, I can understand in a case where the Jew does the first half and a non-Jew does the second half. Midahava Leili Yisrael Mishkat Ruba. We need the Jew to do the majority, Velo Shachat, and he does not do shchita of the majority. But kinafka chayusa, when the animal's life leaves it, he's not doing shchita. It's when the idolater is working that the animal dies. Elohacha. But here, mikti, mishchat shachit. Who's doing the shchita? Somebody who's allowed to do the shchita. Mali b'makom nekev, mali b'hagav lo b'nekev. Who cares whether he begins with the hole or he ends with the hole? That's going to all be fine. And so as a result, that seems to be how we conclude. And so as a result, it seems like we follow, based on Rav Yehuda's answers, that if it's we follow the majority in general, so 1/3 good, 1/3 bad, 1/3 good, we'll follow the majority. 1/3 bad, 1/3 good, and it'll be kosher. 1/3 bad, 1/3 good, 1/3 bad. Again, follow the majority, and it's not valid. If you have a hole, however, well, then we will follow because now there's no longer a relevance of the majority. The question is when the life leaves the animal, is somebody who's proper doing shchita. And if the answer is yes, then it's kosher. And if the answer is no, then it's not kosher. And so therefore, it doesn't matter whether the hole is at the beginning of the shechita or at the end of the shechita. If the hole is pre-existing and it wasn't created by the non-Jew, well, then you're going to be okay. Okay, so now we get to the next Mishnah, and the next Mishnah starts as follows. Hashochet min hatzadin, if you do shechita from the side of the neck, shechita so kshera, the shechita is kosher. Basically, we're going to say that it's as if the sides of the neck are like the front of the neck. Hamolik min hatzadin. However, if you do malika from the sides, malika so psula, that malika is going to be invalid. Hashochet min ha'oref. However, if you do shchita from the back of the neck, and we'll see what oref means in a moment, shchita so psula, then the shchita is puzzle because you need to do it from the front or from the sides. The sides are considered like the front. Hamolik min ha'oref, but if you do malika from the back, malika so kshera, that is what you're supposed to do, and so it's kosher. Hashochet min hatzavar, if you do the shchita from the front, shchita so kshera. Well, again, that's what you're supposed to do. That's going to be kosher. Hamolik min hatzavar, if you do the malika from the front, malika so psula, the malika is not going to be valid because, again, you have to do it from the back. Shekol ha'orev kasher la-malika. The back is where you're supposed to do malika. V'kol hatzavar kasher la-shchita. And the front of the neck is where you're supposed to do shchita. Nimtza kasher b'shchita, pasul b'malika, kasher b'malika, and pasul b'shchita. If it's kosher for shchita, it's going to be invalid for malika. If it's kosher for malika, it's going to be invalid for shchita. So the Gemara wonders, my orif, what do we mean by this orif? So ilema orif mamish, if you want to tell me that we mean the literal back of a person's head, because Rashi tells us, inema orif mamish, mashi yesh min ha'orif achore hapartzu. The orif literally refers to what is opposite the face. So here's our face. So the back of our head, right here, opposite the middle of the face, is actually where we have our indentation in the back of our head. That is going to be the orif. And so that is what we initially think is the orif, but that's really part of the head. My ear yashochi. Why, if in fact we're talking about that high up, why are you even telling me that shchita is not valid? Afilu molik nami mimul arpo amarachman. The Torah tells us that you have to do malika in the location that is facing the back of the head, namely what is just below the back of the head, namely the back of the neck. And so as a result, below our po, you're not supposed to do the back of the head. And so if you did malika there, it would be invalid. So why, if orif means literally the back of the head, that can't work. So ela my orif. So what does orif mean in our Mishnah? Mimul orif. It really means what faces the back of the head, namely the back of the neck. Kedikatani seifa, as we say at the end, kol ha'orif kosher l'malika. Because after all, we said that the entire orif is kosher for malika, so we must mean the mul arpo. So, okay. So menahanimili, how do I know that mimul arpo refers to the back of the neck? The Tana Rabbanan, mimul arpo. We have a brisa that says, how do I know what does mimul arpo mean? That mimul arpo, just to be clear, it's in Vayikra Perek Hey Pasuk Chet in the discussion of how one does malika. So mul haroa es haoref. It is the mul is what sees the oref, and so as a result, v'chein hu omer v'hu yoshev mumuli. He's going to sit opposite me. V'omer, and in addition, we have the pasuk kifanu elai oref v'lo panim, that they turned the back of their head towards me and not their face, and so we'll see. So my va'omer, why does this brisa cite a second verse? Meaning, we already told us that the mul means that what you can see, and so as a result, the mul orif should be what is opposite is opposite and visible to the back of one's head, which is namely the neck. And so as a result, doesn't that we get that from that first statement? Why did we have an additional statement? Why did we cite an additional verse? Namely, we cited a verse from Bamidbar Perek Kafbet Pasuk Hey, where it says V'hu Yoshev Mimuli. This is in connection with Balak's concern about the Jewish people being coming into his area. So v'chitema. So if you say, so the answer is v'chitema orif gufei lo yadin and hecha. If you tell me I don't know where the orif is to begin with, right? Because just knowing what mul means doesn't tell us where the orif is. So deneda mul didei hecha. So how do I know where the mul is if I don't know where the orif is? So tashma. That's why we need the second verse. Kifanu elai orif v'lo panim. For they turn their back of their head towards me and not their face. And so that's why we have the second verse. Where it which is from Yirmiyahu with Perek Bet Pasuk of Zion, and so as a result, that's going to explain the situation, and so that is going to help us understand that mul oref means what sees the back of one's head, and that is namely the neck, which is right there and is able to look up essentially at the indentation that you have in your head. Okay, so Amri b'nei Rabbi Chia, so the son of Rabbi Chia said, mitzvahs malika, the mitzvah of malika, machzir simanim la'achorei ha'oref umolik, that when you do malika, you're going to move the trachea and the esophagus of the bird towards the back to do that malika. So igad Amri, so some say af machzir. V'ika da'amri machzir dafka. So the question is, when he said this, was he saying that you can move the pipes to the back, or was he saying that you have to move the pipes to the back? So, Mistabra Commander Amar Af Machzir, it makes sense to say that he was saying that you can move the pipes to the back, and not that you have to. Mimai, and how do I derive that? Because Midikatani, because we have in our Mishnah, Hashochet Mina Orif Shchita So Psula, if you do the slaughtering from the back of the neck, so then it's going to be invalid. Hamolik mina oref malika sok sheira. But if you do malika and from the back of the neck, it's going to be kosher. Now the isal tekadaitek, as we turn to daf kafam and aleph, if you say to me maxir davka that you have to move the pipes to the back, my irya molek. Why are you telling me that only molek is valid? Afilu shokeg nami, even if you do the shchita from the back, because you're not cutting the spine first, but rather you're cutting the pipes, that should be valid. Elalav shmamina ma'af machzir. So it must be that even if you move the pipes to the back. And our Mishnah is talking where you did not move the pipes. And therefore, that is why the shchita from the back is not going to be kosher. So we, again, are continuing our discussion of shchita. We will pick up, God willing, from there tomorrow. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.